to you. Excellent. So again, appreciate everyone for joining today for a conversation with John and Maya. And we're going to be talking about using AI for emerging CPG brands, right? And I'm sure as a bunch of you saw, you're kind of wondering like, okay, exactly what are we going to be talking about and how can I implement this in my business? And Maya is going to do exactly that and talk about some of the initial fundamentals around AI, what it is, and how you can actually implement it. And then the second half, we're going to be going through some practical use cases as well. That way you can walk away from here with better knowledge, understanding, and some perspective on how to actually implement this for your business as you're growing. I'd also like to introduce John Geletka with Geletka Plus. He does amazing work with Maya and kind of just in general on the digital marketing space. Marketing in general has been in the industry for a long time now and has a huge amount of perspective on what works and what doesn't. So I'd love John to just do a quick introduction and then we'll pass it off to Maya and jump right in.
Yeah, guys, thanks everyone for attending today. I think this will be a really cool talk for a lot of people. One of my favorite things to do is to bring new technologies to companies like you guys, and half of that's selfish, right? So I get to learn and play around and dive in and make stuff. And then half of it is really helpful. And it's really cool to see when a new technology hits the market, and especially technology like AI, that I hope you guys walk out of this and feel like, hey, this is something that I can actually start using in my company today and have some ideas. That would be my ultimate goal out of this. And so I brought one of the best in the business, Maya from Savvi, to talk to you guys about that and give you guys a high level on AI, but more importantly, some practical uses for your business. So I hope you guys enjoy. And with that, I'll hand it off to Maya.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maya, and I am going to be talking to you a little bit today about what AI is, more importantly, what it isn't, because I think it's important to understand what you can do with it, but also what you can't do with it. Oops. And I'm going to share a couple of slides with you. I welcome your questions as well. If you want to type them into the chat, I think Jordan's going to be in charge of peppering me with questions in the chat. So if you have any questions about any of the topics we're discussing or how it applies, please let us know. And with that, let's talk about AI. But first, I want to give you a little bit of background about myself. My name is Maya. So I am founder and CEO of Savvi AI. And previous to Savvi AI, I worked with a ton of brands and retailers at GP Shopper, which is a company I also founded. We worked with Adidas, Best Buy, Walmart, and Estee Lauder. So we're very familiar with sort of the overview of the brand and retail world. We then sold that company to a company called Synchrony Financial, where I spent the last 3 years building artificial intelligence solutions and machine learning solutions for fintech. And that was super fun. But as I repeatedly told John, I am a very reluctant banker. I am a marketer at heart, but more than a marketer, I am a person who loves new technology, but loves new technology in the sense that it should be democratized and brought to everyone. You know, one of the things that I realized in mobile, and even before that, in the earlier days of the internet, is there were a lot of big companies using the coolest, newest technologies, but it wasn't really accessible for everyday companies. So with that in mind, we started Savvi to bring machine learning solutions to every business, because every business should be able to compete with some of the top companies in the world. But let's start with first things first. What is AI and machine learning? So we see and we hear those terms being tossed around all the time. I am so tired of this. I don't know about the rest of you, but every time that we think about AI, the first thing we think about the artificial intelligence that's coming to kill us. And as much as I would love to know what flavor of snacks or Doritos that, for example, the Terminator prefers versus, you know, in iRobot, what kind of water the robot is likely not needing to drink. The reality is this type of artificial general intelligence is more of a futuristic concept. It may or may not happen. It's something that a lot of folks like to discuss of what happens when the computer intelligence that we program gets so smart that it can replicate all functions of the human brain. But the reality is a lot of scientists are even debating when and if this is going to happen. And the timelines for this are pretty extreme. So I think we should set this aside. And that said, I have looked out my window. A Terminator has not appeared, so I'm pretty confident that not today has Skynet gone self-aware. So that said, let's discuss what artificial intelligence actually is. It's a very old concept. You might not know this, but artificial intelligence goes all the way back to the 1950s, when folks realized that we can start programming machines to act, to learn, and to adapt. So now the first thing that means is we started programming machines, and this is such a human instinct. Let's see if they can play games. And this reminds me, for any of you old movie buffs, that this reminds me of the old movie War Games. Would you like to play a game? Well, the first game we taught it to play was checkers. And if artificial intelligence started in the 50s, in the 1960s, we taught a computer to beat us at checkers. And that was pretty impressive. We taught it all the moves. Checkers is a pretty simplistic game. So that's the big umbrella. So when you hear people say artificial intelligence, they're talking about a big umbrella of machines and programs that can learn, act, and adapt on data. Now let's fast forward to the 80s and 90s when we start talking about machine learning. Machine learning is a section of artificial intelligence. It's a subset of it. It's when we started developing algorithms that can learn to perform better on more data. Now, this only came about because our computers started getting better. In the 1950s, they had computers that were basically punch cards. Nowadays, by the 90s, we started having computers that could process more data, so they can learn faster on wider amounts of data. And then by 1997, we taught computers to play a more complicated game, chess. And in 1997, a computer beat a human grandmaster at chess. Now, there's something else you've probably heard more about recently, which is something called deep learning. This is the stuff that Google loves talking about. And deep learning is another subset of machine learning. Deep learning uses even more data, even larger computers crunching even more data. We're talking about petabytes and petabytes of data to learn, to train itself on that vast amount of data. So that is what deep learning is. It's a subset of machine learning that's using neural networks to construct models and to use even more data to process information and come to conclusions and learn and adapt. There are different flavors of machine learning. The first flavor of machine learning that you might have heard a lot about is visual machine learning. Can we teach a computer to recognize objects? Like, for example, it took a while, but eventually computers recognized that Guy Fieri is not, in fact, a hot dog. So hot dog, not a hot dog.
Are we sure about this? Are we sure?
I'm not really sure. I think if you put a blonde wig on a hot dog, it would definitely confuse some machines. So hot dog, not a hot dog. We taught it visual recognition. Now we're going to talk about exactly how visual recognition applies to CPG in just a second. So keep that in mind. Basically, what the computer is looking for is patterns and shapes. And when it sees a pattern and a shape that looks like a hot dog, it declares itself a hot dog. The second type that you may have heard of, and you may have heard of a term called GPT-3 that Google talks about a lot, is language-based machine learning. Language-based machine learning ingests tons and tons and tons of written content. And from that written content, it can create new content. If you ever want to laugh, guys, check out this blog called Soulless Food. Basically, this gentleman is scraping recipes off the internet, off other people's blogs, and creating completely new recipes, one of which was called a meatloaf drumstick. So some are winners, some are not winners. But it's starting to write. But when I say it's writing, that the AI is writing, what I'm really saying is the AI is looking for patterns of what writing is, and then it's mimicking those patterns. It's saying, this is what recipes contain certain ingredients. Okay, I'm gonna make a feeling sad sandwich. Well, I've read a lot of blogs on the internet that says when you're feeling sad, you should definitely eat Nutella. Okay, so my feeling sad sandwich is gonna have Nutella. So that's how it works. It looks through patterns and language, and then it constructs out of those patterns what it deems to be a legitimate recipe. Really fun blog to check out, especially the meatloaf drumstick. Finally, we can talk about statistical machine learning. And statistical machine learning is when the machine learning algorithm takes in tons and tons of data and starts making predictions based on your habits of what you might like next. So for example, Netflix uses this a ton. If you've ever used any streaming service and it says, because you like this, you might like that. Because you have watched shows like London Spy, you're really gonna like Broadchurch. What it's doing is taking in tons of data from other viewers and saying, wow, all the viewers that watched X are also watching Y. So at its heart, what the AI is doing is it's creating what's called models, but not these models. Although I'm kind of convinced that in Karlie Kloss's coding camp, that is a real thing, that Karlie Kloss probably did create a world-ending AI. So basically AI models are programs. So when you hear people talk about, oh, I have the best models, they're not literally talking about these models. What they're talking about is I have the best programs that are most attuned to finding patterns. And then it's using those patterns to find conclusions on new data. Wait a minute, what does all that mean? That basically means, and I'm going to tell you the deep, dark secret of most of machine learning. Ready, guys? Most of machine learning is just pattern recognition on steroids. It's a machine that can process a ton of data and say, if X happens, you have a very good chance of probably doing Y. So if somebody comes to your website and they have bought your blueberry flavor of beverage, they're actually really likely to also want raspberry, but they are really not likely to want lemon lime. See where I'm going with this? It's taking tons of data, more data than any of us can ever process, more data than we can see on our Google Analytics, more data than we can think about through our Tableau. And it's processing all that data all the time. And it's constructing these models, which are just really accurate predictions. If X, then Y. So that's what most of machine learning is. And I know a lot of data scientists will say it's much more complicated than that. But for most of what we're going to use it for, it's pattern recognition on steroids. That's why when you see AI create art, what it's really looking at is art throughout history and saying, oh, everyone thinks this is good art. Therefore, look for patterns of what made this good art. And then it creates like avocado chairs for you, because apparently that is great art. Do we have any questions so far, Jordan? Do you want me to answer any of the questions, or should I just keep going?
No questions so far. And just as a reminder, if anyone does have any questions on like, hey, what's the difference between visual and text-based or statistical, feel free to drop those in the chat and I will jump in and ask Maya. But other than that, we don't have any so far. So let's keep going.
Awesome. Well, because I have overwhelmed you with my knowledge of machine learning. But now, okay, here's the punchline. Why should you care? Why should any CPG brand care at all about the rise of the machines, or whether machines can recognize patterns, or what machines care about in their breakfast cereal? Why should anyone care? Well, the reason everyone should care is because of consumers. Because ultimately consumers are starting to demand intelligent experiences, and they're starting to demand personalization. They're starting to demand relevant offers. I mean, there's nothing more annoying to me than when I buy something as a gift from a brand and all of a sudden I get spammed that I'm really interested in men's socks. I am not really interested in men's socks. That was a one-off purchase, and I am sick of hearing about your sock promotions. Or targeted content. You know, most of marketing nowadays for CPG and for many brands is based on creating content, video content, Instagram content, photo content. How can we make sure that all this content that we're creating is getting in front of the right audience and is resonating with that audience? And all consumers are expecting right now ongoing benefits. But here's the reality, no matter what industry you're in, these are now table stakes. Consumer experience. And thanks to the largest players like the Netflix, like the Googles, like the Amazons of the world, consumers are now taught that this is how they need to interact with every brand, that every brand needs to be personalized, that every brand needs to be tailored.
Maya, can I tell you a quick story?
Sure, absolutely.
So one of, everyone's all, including me, right, kind of freaked out just like on how specific things on like Facebook ads are to things I've searched for. Just during my day. And at one point, like it just starts to feel really creepy, like, oh my gosh, they're just following everything I do. So I had a friend who just turned off kind of a lot of the tracking. But now Facebook's still going to give him ads, but he's getting ads for like wedding dresses.
Yep.
And he's like, he's single, he has no interest in wedding dresses, but now throughout his feed are things that he's like completely uninterested in, the complete opposite. And so while like it's kind of creepy to see things that you actually like might be kind of interested in, it's also just like really annoying seeing things that have nothing to do with you.
I mean, and it's a big argument. You know, Facebook is notorious for their use of machine learning for both good reasons and bad reasons. I'm not going to get into it. But the reality is one of Facebook's big arguments against that new Apple update that basically lets you set privacy and not have targeting across apps is like, oh, people are going to see wedding dresses when they don't want to. And I guess like as consumers, and this is something that like brands have to think about, you know, there are a ton of consumers now who are turning off the ability to get tracked because they're just over it. Because I'm tired of typing in a search for Google and then all of a sudden having my Instagram feed be bombarded with like, I'm looking for outdoor furniture right now, being bombarded with outdoor furniture ads. I was like, look, I looked at it on a whim. This is not like the sum total of my mental space. So, you know, as brands, we have to realize that our ability to gather the data that we use for targeting is going to be severely limited. And the thing to think about is opt-in strategies. You know, as brands, it's our duty. I mean, especially if you're operating in Europe and you're dealing with GDPR, or you're operating out of California, and soon that will be a standard in the US as well. It's like GDPR light, which is that consumers can request not to be tracked. So now you have to give them a compelling reason why they should be tracked. And personalization is often that reason. Is brands can say, listen, I want to give you personalized and relevant offers. I want to give you personalized and relevant content because I want to build a better relationship with you and not just spam you. So, but the flip side of that is pretty bad. When consumers do not get their personalization because now they've been so spoiled in knowing that they're going to have relevant content, they often stop buying from a brand. If a brand is just spraying and praying, as we say, consumers are going to be like, you know what, I'm over it. I don't unsubscribe, please. But what a lot of us are doing today, and especially if we're on the marketing end of CPG, is we're doing a lot of guessing. I mean, listen, A/B testing has been around for decades. A/B testing means that we take a guess and we say, this is what I think is going to happen. I believe it's going to happen. I'm not so sure, but I'm going to take a guess based on my intuition. Then I'm going to implement an experiment. I'm going to segment my audience, let's say, into two groups. Half my audience is going to receive this message. The other half of my audience is going to receive this message. Then I run my experiment. And then I sit back and I watch the data come in. And I say, oh, did I do well? Did I do well? Oh, yes, 53% of them responded. Okay, now everyone's getting this message. Well, that's not sustainable. I mean, that's not sustainable for a lot of reasons. It's time consuming. It often fails. You know, we're forcing marketing managers to start writing 20 different segments of content. And even that's not enough. Because if I'm in group B, even though group A responded better, I might never respond to the message in group A. So like a lot of the segmentation and a lot of this is very, very manual. And it's very, very frustrating to a lot of marketing managers who are forced to now, you know, create these multi-segments of content. And you could say, okay, cool. I do A/B testing, but why should I care about any of this? And what's this have to do with machine learning? It has a lot to do with machine learning, actually, because when you look at all of the personalization going on right now, the best personalization today is happening vis-a-vis machine learning. And the way it's happening is actually a fundamental mindset shift from where we used to be. What I mean by that is we used to take guesses and hypothesize about what our audience wants. Machine learning turns that entire theory on its head. And it's a don't hypothesize. Don't tell me what your audience wants. Tell me what you want them to do. So for example, tell me you want to increase purchase volume. Tell me you want to increase AOV. Tell me you want to increase engagement on my site through clicks. Tell me just what your goals are. Don't tell me what you think they're going to react to. Tell me what your goals are. Then machine learning starts looking through all your data and saying, hey, can we find a pattern of people who did engage also have these characteristics? So it looks through data and it learns what are the patterns of high AOV? What are the patterns of frequent purchasers? What else do they have in common? And then Not your marketing manager has to start pivoting. Literally the software starts pivoting and saying, okay, this group should deliver to get this message, but it's not group. This person should get this message. That's something a marketing manager can never do, no matter how many like Red Bulls and pixie sticks you give them. They can never sit there and do true one-to-one personalization. Machine learning is in fact one-to-one personalization, because the machines don't care about segments. They care about how can I get this individual to do the positive pattern and positive outcome I want them to do. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, it does. And I think that's it's interesting because I've heard this being talked about for probably like a decade now, right? Of like personalization is like the next thing is next thing. But I mean, we're going to talk about this a little bit, like, just that being implemented is just really hard. And then how do you know that you're collecting all the right algorithm or all the right data about someone or that information? So how do you actually like put this into place?
Yep. And we will definitely talk about that today. But here's how this is kind of a mind shift for marketers. Marketers are used to going on their intuition, going on what they think is going to happen because they have a lot of experience in the field. In a weird way, humans are really good at pattern recognition as well. Machines just don't sleep while they do it. We go to sleep, we go to dinner, we hang out with our children. Machines are like, no, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. So the interesting part about this shift is, and where I think a lot of marketers get a little hung up on it, is they say, well, wait a minute, are you saying that I'm being replaced? I'm being replaced by machine learning? Absolutely not. What's interesting about machine learning is, in a weird way, it makes marketers into strategists and not tacticians. And let me explain. Marketers now can design the strategy of saying, these are my goals for the brand. Here are my metrics for the brand. And then the machine learning can say, okay, I'm going to be your helpful little intern that works 24 hours a day, every day of the week, to try to get you the results you want. So instead of them constantly designing and executing tactics like A/B testing and segmentation, the data will lead them to a better conclusion. And this is where we fail often as marketers, and I will lump myself into this. When we do A/B testing or segmentation, we do a lot of our own persona development and hypothesis. We do that. I think my customer loves yoga, and she has a soul cycling class she goes to yoga, she likes to have brunch with her friends. And you know what? Maybe that's not your best customer, but you have this stuck image in your head of who your persona customer is. And we start advertising to who we want to be our customer or who we think our customer should be, when the data can be telling us something else. The data could be telling us, actually, your best customer is a suburban soccer dad. And if you just double down on that, you can double sales. I know it's not the image you put on your billboards, but that's what's actually selling. So it's very important that we let data have that better idea. And look, the top brands right now are already using machine learning. This had a cool animation that you can't see. Oh, there it is. The top brands are already using machine learning, and in many different ways. One of the ways they're using it, and this is pretty cool, is they're using it in stores. I'm seeing this more in Europe, somewhat in the US as rollout, but they're using smart screens in stores to both tell you what's in stock in a refrigerator aisle, for example, but also, and this is really using vision in AI, it's also telling you what your sentiment is. So if somebody's standing in front of a freezer aisle and they're kind of really frowny, they'll see one type of ad. And if someone's standing in front of a freezer aisle and they look really, really happy or tired, the machine learning can recognize the patterns in their face and start showing them relevant ads. It's also being used by top CPG brands, especially Unilever and the big guys, to manage inventory. Like, who has time to count and predict inventory? Absolutely no one. And as CPG brands know, having your inventory at your retailer in front of your customer at the right time is critical, especially with restocking. With all the supply chain problems we're having right now, the difference between the winners and losers right now is how fast can you actually get your product into a store or in front of a customer. And if you're not doing direct, it's definitely through your wholesale channel. So a lot of what folks are using machine learning for right now is literally inventory prediction. I predict that in this region or in this store, we're going to sell out soon. I know we just ship them in order, but based on the patterns I'm seeing of how this is being bought, I think that raspberry is going to sell out here, but lemon lime is a hit here. So we should start shipping even in advance of them selling out, because we're moving that much product and we don't want to sell out. So it's being used to manage inventory. Most importantly, on the marketing side, it's being used a ton by top brands for personalization, whether it's skincare analysis, whether it's content personalization. Content personalization is huge. I mean, listen, when it doesn't matter what food or beverage product or CPG product you're selling, at the end of the day, you're selling sort of a value promise to the consumer. And you're selling an image of your brand, and you have to make sure that right content that you've spent money and time creating is getting in front of the right people who it's going to resonate in front of. And that's another way that machine learning is being used in CPG. So now the punchline: how can you use machine learning? All right, so these are different use cases for machine learning, but I'm going to focus on the top ones because, to optimize inventory and fulfillment and supply chain management, I'm sure somebody else can talk your ear off about that, and I'm sure many vendors already have, but we're going to stick with the top ones and we'll kind of gloss over the other ones. Listen, the easiest way, and this is so easy, and there's tons of vendors that offer this, is AI-driven chatbots. You might think that that's really stupid. Why do I need an AI-driven chatbot? And maybe you don't. Maybe if you don't do a lot of direct, you don't need it, but maybe if you have a site where your wholesalers go to a lot, they're expecting responses fast. And there's some commonly asked questions that they're going to probably ask you, like how fast can you ship? What's the order volume like? Can you fulfill an order this big, etc. There's a lot of software out there that for fairly reasonable costs offer you a basic chatbot that you can pre-program with, if they ask you this question, give this answer, and then move it to a human if the question gets more complicated. It's a great way of you actually having extra hands on deck, because we're all busy and we all don't have time to be everywhere all at once 24 hours a day. So you can still fulfill some of your customer requests when you're sleeping or eating. The second thing is personalized customer journey. And this one I cannot stress enough. Look, your customers, like I said, are demanding this personalization. If you go to a website and, for example, the website has only, you're selling snacks. And every time I go to your website, I see the bacon flavored snacks. And I'm a vegetarian. And after a while, I'm just like, you know what, they're like doubling down on bacon. And I'm not seeing your vegetarian options. That's not great. You're missing me. Yeah, I'm not connecting with you. And as we know, customers have just a small window of time to really make that connection. So personalized customers' journeys can work in many ways. One of the ways that's really simple that we've worked with and talked to John about is you can actually personalize the style sheets on your page to react to different consumers. Consumers react to different colors at different times. We know color is important. We know scent is important. It's why we take so much effort on it. So nowadays, websites are so much more flexible with the style sheets that they can load. So for example, we ran an experiment where we tested neutral, bright, dark mode, basic mode. And the machine learning was literally choosing one-to-one based on the device a customer came in on, based on their gender, based on their previous purchase history, what style sheet to even rebrand the entire page with. Personalized customer journey can even mean the banners on your homepage. Not everyone, you might have 5 products, right? And you show all 5 products all the time to everyone in the same order, because that's how we often set up our homepage hero banners. But the reality is that customers want to see what's relevant to them. And machine learning can make sure that the most relevant banner is the first banner to John, but to Jordan sees a different first banner all the time, because my goal is click-through rate. My goal is purchase. Let the machine decide what to show Jordan, what to show John, what to show Maya. Let me just load up the banners. I mean, those are very easy wins of personalization journey, and they make a difference. Under increasing customer engagement, again, goes back to our content. Engagement matters. Engagement with your brand matters. How many times are they touching your brand across different channels? How many times are they going into your Insta, your Twitter? How many times are they watching your videos? How many times are they engaging in these different touch points? And here's something else. What's the best touch point to reach them on? Many of us still rely, on certain types of campaigns, let's say an email campaign or a text message campaign, saying, oh, that works for everybody. Or a vendor told me that consumers love text. Okay, great. Do all consumers love receiving text messages? I know I don't. And if I receive a text message from a brand, I'm like, unsubscribe, stop, block. But maybe I'm really responsive to Instagram ads. Maybe I'm really responsive to YouTube videos. Maybe I'm one of those customers who just likes to learn about it myself. And then when I'm ready to make a purchase, make a purchase. So understanding and increasing customer engagement is a way that we can use machine learning to optimize not only what content they see, but in what channel they see that content. So that's also very important. Understanding what channel they can see what content in is a key to customer engagement. It also deals with the next point, which is understanding consumer sentiment. We put all of this information out there as marketers and brands, but we don't have time to cull through it and understand if things are turning against us or if things are turning for us. We're told, hey, everybody's really into pumpkin spice lattes. So said Starbucks, and shoved pumpkin spice lattes down our throats for like 5 years now. But now Starbucks realized something very interesting through analyzing data and having machine learning looking at data. What they realized is what people really liked was pumpkin spice foam. I know it's really weird. You all might know foam addicts. I know several foam addicts that really used to order pumpkin spice lattes in a small cup, but they'd ask, or a small pumpkin spice latte, they'd ask them to put it in a large cup and fill it up with foam. And Starbucks looked at the data and they were like, oh my God, what they really love is the foam. So now we can just sell them coffee with foam. Easier solution. So Starbucks this year introduced a new flavor of coffee where you're just buying coffee with a lot of pumpkin spice foam. And it's selling because they looked at the data. They had, and this is, when I say they looked at the data, this isn't humans looking at the data. As CPG brands, as we grow, we have to realize what our limitations are. And I know this, some of you guys are in different stages and sizes of your development. And in the beginning, I've been there too. This is my second startup. In the beginning, we look at all the data because we have to. We look at all the data and we continue looking for patterns. But as we grow, we can no longer continue looking at all the data. It's impossible. And we can hire an army of data scientists or interns to look at it. But the reality is once we start teaching machines to have goals, the looking at the data is no longer relevant. We don't have to look at things that happened 6 months ago and say, did that work? We have a machine constantly optimizing for today. And so what does this all mean for you? Well, I'll tell you the bad news first. I'm a very bad news first kind of girl. Like, tell me the bad news first, then tell me the good news. Let's end on a high note. So the bad news first is to use machine learning as a CPG brand. You're either going to need to have some sort of software. Well, you're going to have software. Like machine learning doesn't run on a toaster unless that toaster is a smart toaster. And then maybe you can learn from toasters how people like toast in the morning and program their toast. But if you have your basic pop-up toaster, nobody's going to make machine learning work on that toaster. You need to have software. So whether it's email software, whether it's CRM software, whether it's website software, and website is usually the easiest place to start. We all have a website. We've all probably developed that website. We all have access to a developer who can insert code on that website and make it smarter. That's the easiest place to start. Or, and this is both self-serving, but the actual reality, you're going to need a vendor to help you. Because the reality is, unless you have a niece or nephew that happens to like dabble in TensorFlow, which is a form of machine learning algorithm that Google's developed on the side, and says, hey, auntie, I can help you out. I know TensorFlow, and I can help program our inventory management system with it. You're probably going to need someone's support. Now, the question for you is, where do you need that support? The right questions that you should start asking as a CPG brand are where am I getting overwhelmed? Where are my breakages occurring? And where am I spending the most time? Remember, there's only one of us. I mean, maybe you have a company with like 50, 100, 500 people, but there's still never enough people to solve all these problems. So we have to start asking, where are breakages occurring? Well, listen, my breakages occurring is I'm not getting inventory fast enough to my retail partners, or my breakage is occurring that I'm not able to really understand why consumers buy from me once and then like never come back again, or they buy from me twice a year, and how can we make that 6 times a year? So now first you have to understand kind of the scope of the problem that you're trying to solve, and then go ahead and try to solve it with the right group of vendors. I mean, you can do this. Part of the premise of machine learning is it doesn't have to be hard. It is hard in certain situations. If you're Unilever, machine learning is super hard because they have hugely complicated supply chains that they have to worry about, right? But if you're a CPG brand with an awesome website, and now you want more people to engage with this website, the content that you're creating, you want to get, maybe you have a subscription program running and you want them to buy outside of the subscription. You're like, how can we motivate people to buy outside of the subscription? These are really basic machine learning problems, and these are very basic machine learning problems that vendors can help you solve, and they can be done. And this is what I'll stress, and this is self-serving. You are going to get price quotes all over the map, right? Do your diligence and do your research. It doesn't have to be that hard. You don't need an army of data scientists to solve your problems. Many of your problems are actually a lot more simple, and there's a lot of companies out there today that can help you solve them. And with that, I will turn it over to Jordan and John. So thank you so much, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Maya, and definitely appreciate it. No, this is really great. And I think those examples that you shared on some of the practical kind of first step implementations are things that are very, I won't say easy to do, but understandable in terms of how that can make a really big difference. So definitely thank you for sharing that. We have a ton of questions that just jumped into the chat, so this is awesome. So we'll start with these, and if anyone else has any additional questions, we'll get to those as well. I'm going to ask them a little bit out of order just because of where the conversation ended up. So we kind of ended on what that implementation generally looks like, but Yewande asked, when you're implementing these things, is it a custom implementation for each kind of company, or is there kind of proprietary software that plugs into like Shopify or your website in order to make these things happen?
Well, I mean, there's 2 different ways of doing it. There are companies who are specializing in certain aspects. Like, let's say there are companies out there who specialize in AI for inventory fulfillment. Like, this is all they do all day long is inventory fulfillment. And in that case, if you are a mid-sized business, it might behoove you to use their models and their software, because you're not going to build it out for yourself. You're just not. If you're a larger company, you might just say, oh, those models are really generic and they work for lots of different companies, but I need something that works for my specific problems and my specific data. And then you go down the path of building it out yourself. For things like websites and optimizations on websites, I mean, like, again, shameless plug, so I apologize, but I'm at least transparent about it. Like, John and I have done this all day long together, where we take websites and we make them into smarter websites. That type of stuff, you would turn around and you would go towards who's your website provider, who's your vendor, and is your website provider using ML tools? And if they're not using ML tools, I mean, the big question is, why not? I mean, look, I know there's a lot of hype around machine learning, but let me just tell you the reality of it is there was also a lot of hype about cloud computing 10 years ago. People are like, the cloud, everything's a cloud, the cloud. And now there's not one of us who's not running software that's not cloud-based. Machine learning is going to do that for software. It is that next evolution where we stop taking guesses and we start looking at data.
I love that. Saloma has a question. Any differences when it comes to using AI for B2B versus B2C applications?
Nope, it's just different patterns. Remember what I said before. AI, for all intents and purposes, machine learning is pattern recognition on steroids. Yes, B2B companies have very different patterns than direct-to-consumer companies, but it's still about figuring out what their patterns are and optimizing for their patterns. It's figuring out what their goals are. At the end of the day, direct-to-consumer companies and B2Bs all want the same thing. We want to sell product. I mean, maybe B2Bs want to sell product to businesses so they have a smaller customer base filled with larger customers, and direct-to-consumers have a larger customer base filled with smaller customers. But these are all patterns that the machine can recognize. What makes for a good B2B customer? You know, you might have guesses about what makes for a good B2B customer, but those guesses might not be based in the reality of what makes their hunches, you know? Again, this is a mindset shift, and one that people are still coming to terms with. We're used to operating on hunches. We're humans, we're really good pattern recognition machines. We've evolved over millennia to be so.
You know, and that really leads to Tony's question of like, you know, when you allow the AI to determine the customer journey and present to the customer, does that making troubleshooting that journey difficult, either like technical or strategic, since AI can be a black box sometimes after it's trained?
Well, let's talk about that for a second. AI doesn't have to be a black box. Machine learning does not have to be a black box at all. This is deep learning, yes, is a black box to most humans. You know why? Because it's analyzing so much data that we literally can't wrap our brains around it. It's like analyzing a solar system worth of data almost, right? And we're just like, boom, that's too much. But when you talk about everyday AI problems, so let's set aside, and I think this bears repeating, there's different types of problems that machine learning can solve. There's big problems like protein folding, self-driving cars, you know, there's awesome things like that. Putting the right ad in front of a customer is not that problem. You can use a lot less data, and you can use a much more simplistic model. Remember, models are just programs trained to look at certain types of patterns. And those models should be pretty transparent to you. You know why? Because you're helping design them in most cases. You're telling, you know, the vendors, let's say it's Savvi, you're telling Savvi, here are the things that I think influences customers that buy products from us. I think it's time of day, I think it's age, I think it's, you know, it's device type, I think it's, do they have a subscription? Have they been on our Instagram? And then the machine looks at all those data points and it says, is that true? Is there a pattern there that we can recognize? And if there is, we can find it and start helping the customer journey towards that pattern. It shouldn't be a black box to you. You shouldn't not have control. And this bears repeating and is very, very important. You shouldn't feel out of control when you use machine learning. If some vendor comes to you and says, don't worry, we have a proprietary algorithm. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. We've got this. We're smarter than you. We have data scientists. We have PhDs. And by the way, I noticed there's one data scientist on this call. Hey, we love you too. But you guys are like rare unicorns that are being fought after by the like Googles and the Facebooks of the world. But the point being is that if they can't explain to you what are some of the inputs it's using, if they don't have transparency, then you should consider that a yellow flag. Because at the end of the day, there needs to be transparency because you're accountable for the decisions that AI is going to make, or that machine learning is going to make. You know, and Pepsi, I think, learned this the hard way when they set like Microsoft, it was Microsoft, that set a Twitter bot into the universe to learn and to respond to queries. And very quickly, it was taught by some very, you know, mischievous hackers. It turned into like a racist, misogynistic, sexist, xenophobic Twitter bot, because that's what they taught it. That's what they fed it, that information. So you need to know, because you are responsible for the outcomes of how your brand and your brand reputation is. And if a vendor can't tell you this is how it works, and they tell you it's a magic black box, start asking more questions.
So true. A couple of questions that came up around how iOS 14 and the new 15 are going to affect data inputs and collection. What are your thoughts there?
Well, listen, 15 is all about privacy. I mean, Apple was very, very clear. Apple threw a shot across the bow of companies like Facebook, which I don't want to politicize this, but I do want to say this. A lot of companies have made a lot of money mining a lot of data that you may not be aware they're mining. And I think that Apple, to differentiate themselves in the market, has said, one of the things we're selling you is privacy. Now, listen, we can discuss the moral implications of selling privacy back to people all day long. And there's Clubhouse rooms that they go on for hours on that, if you ever want to go down a rabbit hole. But the reality is that with increased privacy laws, we need more consent. But the only way we're going to get that consent is to point out to a customer why we're doing something. And guys, it shouldn't be that difficult to point out to a customer why you want their data. If you're not doing something nefarious with it, if you're saying, listen, I have some content that might be relevant to you. I notice that you're a loyal customer. I want your data, or I'm entering in this data share agreement with this company. Here's what it means. And if you want out of it, here's how you get out of it. Customers are going to be more loyal in the future to companies that respect and are transparent about how they're using their data, because we're all now hung over from kind of the data vacuum of the last 10 years. And now we want control back. And that control is going to bring loyalty.
I love that. I'd love to kind of hear, maybe, John, if you might have some examples of, you can either talk specific clients or just generic clients that you've worked with in terms of what you've implemented for their companies and what kind of impact it's made.
Yeah, so impact is still a little early. However, we've implemented some fairly simple website controls, right? Kind of like Maya said, hey, can I look and see what happens, what AI does if I look at color? Can I look and see what happens if we look at order of questions that people are asking? Can I look and see what happens if we prioritize this? So for us, right, we're in the implementation phase, right? And still have our testing and saying, hey, what can we just, like kind of like Maya said earlier, what can we get the machine to do in these days, and what kind of marketing problems can we solve? I'm personally, one of the questions I didn't get to jump in on was the B2B one, which I was really kind of stoked about, because I really feel strongly that AI can play a role in B2B, in the sense that it's a super complex buy with influencers and different levels of influencers, informers and decision makers and clusters of decision makers. And that's a very complex thing to understand, that we've always staffed and aligned with people in various levels of journey-based messaging. But taking it down at the AI level, that's kind of like the next thing. I kind of want to do an app that's around B2B and pulling a bunch of data from Salesforce. But that's kind of maybe Q4 this year or late Q4. So we're in that phase, to be honest. And Maya, we're one of many developers on the platform right now. So there's probably a ton more good examples as well that you guys that other folks are playing around with.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot right now with personalization. Like we've worked with companies like such as UL Labs out there in Chicago area to help personalize their website. So what happened is they have a lot of offerings. I mean, we're talking in the hundreds of offerings, and what they were finding is that there's a lot of breakage occurring, because if somebody comes to the site and it's like, if you have to filter down to the thing that's relevant to you, you're honestly, that they're just bounce. But if you start seeing the content that's relevant to you presented up front and center, bounce rates decrease. Suddenly site engagement goes up. Because you're seeing, and again, that's an easy machine learning problem. What do we know about the person? And how can we design a machine learning, a simple machine learning bot that says, if we know this data about the person, if they exhibit these patterns, show them this piece of content for this piece of content. I mean, personalization is literally like machine learning 101. And we've been talking about personalization, Jordan, you accurately pointed out, for like decades. I mean, I was still in school and they're like, the era of personalization is upon us. We can choose if they want red buttons or blue buttons. And now the only way that you're seeing the top brands execute real personalization is with machine learning, because there's no way that humans, it's not that it's like that they can't figure it out. Nobody has a time for it. No one's going to do 100 segment list. Like, that's just ridiculous. And yet the machine can do that, can process it, and can show 100 different pieces of content, or those 5 relevant pieces of content in order for 100 different people.
I love that. Another question that came in: do you have a perspective on leveraging data partnerships?
Sure. I mean, I have a perspective on it from the retail angle, because the previous company that I started, we did a lot of work with retailers, and a lot of them bought second party data or were in data kind of pools and aggregation. You know, obviously everyone wants first party data. Like, I want my own data of my own registered users. Like, wouldn't that be great? But for all of us upstart brands, having your own data on your own registered users is a very small pool to play in. So all of a sudden you end up buying like second party data, which is relevant data from ISPs or other providers that are selling you relevant data about customers or lookalike groups. You know, I'm hit or miss on that. I don't want to kind of get into the details of like vendor bashing or anything, but I'm hit or miss. I've seen that really work well for retailers. I've seen that work amazingly well for some of our fast fashion or Gen Z, like PacSun used it really, really well, second party data, but they literally had a team that was kind of dedicated to that cleansing and setting up that pipes and making sure that the providers they were dealing with like had that data that was all above board and how it worked. Because it's not, because here's the thing about machine learning or anything else. It's not just about gathering the data. Like, I don't know if any of you guys have heard the term data lake. I'm kind of about that term. And the reason is like, there was this phase 5 years ago that everyone was like, just gather whatever data you can about whatever customer in whatever channel. And then people ended up with these huge repositories of data, most of which was out of date. It was incomplete, and it gave them a bad picture of who they thought their customer was. The key to data is not gathering data backwards and piling it into a big silo and then letting like one person on your team being like the dedicated priest of data. The key to good data is having an open flow where you're constantly collecting new data. The data is clean. Here's a term that you guys should become really familiar with in ML or otherwise. You want clean data. What clean data means is that it's complete data. The record is complete. It's usable data, and it's timely data. It's not out of date. I don't care what happened to my customers 3 years ago. I don't have the same products I had 3 years ago. I care about what's going on in the patterns now. So look out for clean data, especially when you look for second party providers. Make them give you samples, and not just like small samples. Make them give you like 1,000+ record samples, because you're going to start seeing some gaps in some of them.
Great points. Awesome. I think that's all the questions that we have. It was great. We were able to get through all those. If anyone has any final questions, feel free to drop them in. Otherwise, any closing thoughts on like where people should get started? Because I know there are a lot of people have kind of takeaways for that.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to get started is figuring out, and this kind of is related to a question that just popped in about having limited capital and wanting this implementation. The easiest way to get started, besides calling John or I, is to start figuring out what data you are collecting. You know, you'd be surprised at what people think they have versus what they actually have. So what do you have access to? And it's a pretty simple project. It shouldn't even take you a couple of weeks. You should just say, okay, I have an Instagram account, I have a website, I have a Facebook ads, I have this and that. What am I getting from all that? Like, what am I getting? Am I finding out people's names? Am I getting their email addresses? Am I getting gender, location? Like, what am I getting? What do I have to work with? And I think once you start with what I have to work with, then you can approach folks and say, this is what I have to work with. Can I make something happen with it? Because sometimes the answer, and sometimes truly the answer is no. Sometimes it's like, look, you have like 20 customers, you're going to get there. But on those 20 customers, it's really hard to establish a pattern. It's just not enough. Most people, I tell them that ultimately you want at least 300 records for the most simplistic ML. Meaning, you know, if you have 20 customers, you can make some conclusions, but probably not. If you have 300 customers, you can start making more conclusions. If you have 1,000 customers, you can start predicting with way more accuracy. So it's not about just more, but it's about making sure your data is clean and it's accurate.
Excellent. Love that. Well, thanks so much, Maya. Definitely appreciate it. John, thank you so much for your insights. I dropped Maya and John's contact information in the chat if you have further questions. I know they're both definitely interested in that, either on the ways to implement it or asking about like what that process looks like. So thanks so much, everyone, and for joining us this Monday. And I hope everyone has a great week.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Not filled with killer robots.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.